You think that you're informed, but you're not. You think that you know what's going on in your country, but you don't. You think you have it all together, and that it's okay to just ignore what goes on in the real world. But I'm telling you that you're about to be destroyed. All of you are about to be destroyed by your complacency. And I'm not trying to be alarmist, but I'm trying to focus your minds on the matter at hand. In one more election cycle, this country will be no more. This is not a threat. This is the reality of your voting.
America's decline and collapse is the inevitable result and outcome of your complacency. Complacency is defined as a feeling of quiet pleasure and security, often while unaware of some potential danger, defect, or the like. Self-satisfaction or a smug satisfaction with an existing situation or condition leading to a disaster ahead.
You're now at your last straw. We're now at the last cycle. And if you vote the wrong way, then your country is done forever. Do you hear me? Your country, your very lives, America, will be done forever. There is a reason why your media says the exact same thing. They got the exact same opinions. It's because your media has been hijacked by socialists. I'm speaking to young Americans of every ethnicity. With the sound of my voice, you're the only hope left we have to save this nation. You liberals and your channels, Young Turks, need to listen, and you other liberals or these other liberal channels also need to listen, because many of the biggest liberals of the past, biggest liberals became conservatives. Many of the conservatives that you see today were very well-known liberals. And there's a reason why they left it, because socialists had taken over the Democratic Party.
What you're witnessing in this video is an excerpt of what's going on in Ukraine. Ukrainian people were disarmed by a treaty that our Democrat President Bill Clinton signed with Russia. It was an agreement with the liberals and the socialists. And what he did was he made sure that Ukraine was disarmed. And as a result, Obama decided not to protect one of our allies, Ukrainians. And what happened? He made that secret deal with Russia during that meeting. He said, I'll give you some space. I'll be more flexible during my second term. Well, in his second term, 2014, Russia came and took Crimea, the oil-producing area of Ukraine, and they took it over because, of course, Russia wants to be the dominant provider of oil. Meanwhile, we ignored the situation in Ukraine. We ignored the plight of the people, and now they were being shot, and their land is being taken by what? The communists in Russia, Vladimir Putin. This is what communism looks like. It's absolute control, it's absolute tyranny, and we can't afford that. Do you want that in your nation? Doesn't matter how many protest signs you have. Doesn't matter how you may object. They're the ones with the guns. This is why you don't want to promote gun control in your country. Look what gun control did to the people of Ukraine. Look at what gun control does to any people group when a government decides to engage in it and push it on the people. The individuals in Ukraine are now suffering. They're being shot, they're being killed, their children have no future, their children have no voice, no freedom of speech, because the individuals and the people of Ukraine were apathetic. They elected a socialist leader, and now that socialist leader has been complicit to Russia ever since, and now they're suffering for it. Communism means absolute government control, and there is no freedom of speech in communist Russia or communist China. There is no freedom of speech, and all opposing views are literally outlawed. The reason why communists and the Democrat Party are pushing gun control in America is the same reason why they did in Russia and China, because a disarmed citizenry is easier to conquer than an armed citizenry. All dissidents are killed. All freedom of speech is silenced. It makes absolutely no sense to vote for a member of the very Democrat Party, which is controlled by the same communists.
They have systematically taken it over, and now they're controlling government policy. They took over the unions. They took over the voice of the American people. They're taking their orders from Russia. They're taking their orders from the KGB. And yet you glibly say, oh, that's fantasy. No, it's not fantasy. I assure you it's not fantasy. I'm going to be presenting you with a series of educational videos to educate you what communism is and how it's literally taken over the Democratic Party. It is literally taking over. Every policy of the Democrat Party
is communist and
is going through the unions first and is funneled through the Democrat Party. And this gentleman, Mr. Trevor Louden, will be teaching this series, and I'm just going to be your host, coordinate it to the next generation. But I want you, young person, to realize the freedoms you now have, you're about to lose because of complacency. I don't know if it's because they've got you on any kind of marijuana or something that's doing something in your mind, but I'm sure that you can hear me. And this is urgent. Your children's lives are at stake. Your very life is at stake. Your very life is in danger. You like your freedom of speech? Well, then you better vote accordingly. You better not continue to elect people who are trying to destroy your freedom. They're even using the immigration system, illegal immigration, promoting illegal immigration, so that it gives those who are not American citizens the right to vote, those who don't even understand their constitutional freedoms anyways, but they're being led to vote Democrat. In other words, they're being led to vote socialist. And that socialism is going to destroy this nation. We are the last bastion of freedom
in the world.
And if you continue to vote the way you do, black man, Hispanic, Latino, then all is lost. The whole world will be controlled by socialism. You talk about one world government, that's what it is. It's not the Illuminati stuff. It's not no, George Orwell. Yeah, George Orwell was a communist, and he warned us about what communism is. It's absolute tyranny. It's absolute tyranny. Government control of everything. Your speech, your very lives. They control everything. And you are about to elect another one. You're about to elect a group of people who are using the immigration system, bringing in 8, 12 million more illegal immigrants, not because they care about families. It's not about that. And I want those who will be voting, who are Hispanic, who can hear my voice right now, who can communicate to the Hispanic community, Latino community, that you left the tyranny of communists and socialists, their failed economic systems, only to be used as a tool to promote communism to the last bastion of freedom, and that's America. That's why this election is so important. That's why you can't afford to not be informed. You can't afford to continue to vote the way you do. You see, they pretty much are trying to wrap things up. Whether you vote for Bush, Jeb Bush, or you vote for any Democrat, you're going to get the same exact results. You're going to get communists controlling your government. That's why the liberal media will promote Jeb Bush and promote almost any Democrat, because the Democrat Party has already been taken over by socialists and communists. And now the establishment candidate is always going to be liberal. It's always going to be leaning communist. It's always going to take orders from communists. And now we're at this place right now where we have to make a decision. It will be far better for you to vote for a conservative, because at least they're voting for America's best interest. It's not about race. They create the race issue to keep you disenfranchised from being a part of the process of the solutions of this country, to being part of the country. They don't want you to be part of the country. They want you to be demoralized. They want you to be disconnected and disillusioned. That's what communists have been doing all these years in America. And it's time for you to join the revolution, the conservative revolution, or you will be dead. You will be done with, and your freedoms will be no more forever. Government's already using the IRS to silence people. The government is already silencing the freedom of association. They're using homosexual marriage movement to silence traditional marriage, destroy traditional marriage in this country. They don't care about the future generations of this country. It's all about weakening this country, so now America is no threat to who? Russia. They're promoting green energy right now because they don't want us to be the dominant oil provider. Because who wants to be the oil provider, the dominant oil provider? It's Russia. They want to control the oil because they know that the most energy comes from oil. Most products that we have comes from oil. And so they know that, so they're promoting all this flimsy green energy stuff, which is okay to promote and study how to make clean energy and biofuels. But the point is that all they need is a few more years, and then they can control the oil market. Communists don't really care about green energy. They only care about giving power to a few, very few people who can control everything. And that's what communists have been doing all this time. And they're about to destroy this country because the young people are not informed. And are you going to be one of those people? Are you going to be part of the revolution to solve it? And we have to end this tyranny. And we have to end the disinformation campaigns. Now, without further ado, it's time for you to listen to Trevor Louden as he explains how communists took over the Democrat Party.
I want to talk about two things today, and they're related. And the first is what I regard as the biggest failure of journalism in this country. And the second is what I would call a central secret of communism. So there is a relationship. Now, I regard the biggest failure of journalism in this country is its inability to vet the leaders of this country, particularly the members of Congress, Senate, etc. Now, I'm sure there's people here who have applied for government jobs in the past. And I know that when you apply for a government job in this country, you get an FBI check. They basically go through your underwear drawers. They check your family background, your associates, your drug habits, your foreign trips, your education, work history, whatever. They go through your history with a fine-tooth comb. And so they should. Because you may be in charge of a military base one day, or curing sensitive government documents, or be a security guard at the American Embassy in Moscow, or one of many, many jobs that if you fail, you could put your country at risk. But you can put on a suit and tie, and you can stand for Congress or the Senate, and you can get elected and serve on the Security Committee, the Intelligence Committee, or the Judiciary Committee, or the Science and Technology Committee, and you can be going down to Cuba on a regular basis, or to Venezuela. You can be associating with communists, going to their meetings, endorsing their causes, have them on your staff, and nobody will say boo. Nobody will call you out. You have got the biggest security risk in your country is up on Capitol Hill. You've got at least 100 people in Congress who wouldn't get a basic security clearance to clean the toilets at any military base in this country. And I'd say you'd have 30 people in the Senate in the same position. So you've got a massive security apparatus in this country monitoring people at every level of your society. And the one group that's exempt, the one group that has no scrutiny whatsoever and can do anything they like, are your leaders. The people who write your laws, who direct your security policy, control your military, write your budgets, are at the heart of your government. They have nothing. You've got someone like Barbara Lee, who's been to Cuba at least 6 times that I know of, for conferences with Fidel Castro, going back to the 70s, who is basically a communist. She was a member of the Committees of Correspondence. She is actively involved with the Communist Party for several years, up until 2006 at least. She is involved with a whole bunch, Democratic Socialists of America, a whole bunch of organisations. She's a communist in every sense of the word. But would the media ever call her out? Because, I think, what was decided long ago is that Congress didn't need security clearances or checkups or anything like this because the media would vet them. And maybe once they would. But the Republicans aren't going to vet the Democrats because they have their own little secrets to hide. The public can't vet them because they don't get any information. It's all down to the media. And the media is either actively complicit with the Marxists or willfully negligent. That is the biggest security problem you have got in your country, and the media is completely complicit in it. Entirely complicit. So I'll talk about, and this leads into what I consider the big secret of communism. And it's not atom bomb spies or Occupy rock throwers or anything like that. It's the ability of a tiny Marxist-Leninist party or Socialist Party to influence public policy in their own country. So how could a sect, say like Democratic Socialists of America, which is about 7,000 strong, or the Communist Party USA, which is between 1 and 5,000 members strong, how could they possibly influence public policy in a country of 300 million plus people? And I'm not counting illegals there because nobody knows how many of those there are. So how could this be? Well, back in the 80s, I spent a lot of time with a New Zealander who had infiltrated our local Communist Party for our security intelligence services. And in 1983, he was sent to Moscow to train at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning in Leningradsky Prospect. And while he was there, now this was an institution of 6,500 students at any one time. This was not a small place. There were people there on 7-year courses, people with one-to-one tutelage. This was a training ground for the future world communist leadership. People there from virtually every country on the globe. And the big thing, they were taught racial agitation, trade union infiltration, espionage techniques. They were taught a lot of stuff. But the biggest thing they were taught was how to use their power and their influence back in their home country to get Moscow's policies adopted by the local Social Democratic Party. The British Labour Party, the Canadian Liberals, the New Zealand Labour Party, the Australian Labour Party, and of course the US Democrats. And as the Soviets always and Russia today regard you as the main enemy, your Democratic Party was very heavily targeted. You've got to think about this, folks. You've got a lot of enemies out there, and you've got these local communist parties. If you were doing your job as a Cuban intelligence officer or a Russian intelligence officer or a Chinese intelligence officer, you would be using your American allies to influence and infiltrate the Democrat Party. You'd be negligent if you didn't. Totally negligent. So I'll give some examples of how this process works. At that time, my friend was in Moscow training. This was the time of the massive anti-nuclear marches in Europe. Thousands of people walking through European capitals with ban the bomb signs and anti-NATO placards, etc. And there was a real ferment at that time and a real danger that NATO would break up. And the Soviets, of course, were encouraging this because they wanted Europe and they knew that without NATO they could have Europe. But they were also very subtle, they're chess players. So what they did, they thought, well, we've got this thing going on in Europe, it's going well, but if we can break away another country outside of Europe from the Western Alliance, that will spur on the destruction of Europe and they won't be able to pin it on us. So they picked on New Zealand because we're small, progressive, socially liberal, and the communists were very strong inside our Labour Party. They controlled our labour union movement and controlled our peace movement. Now at the time, we were proud members of the Australia, New Zealand, United States Military Alliance, ANZUS. And we remembered America. You know, America saved us in World War II. There was no question we're a pro-American country, and the thought that we would ever abandon alliance with America was just inconceivable to most New Zealanders. But in 1984, we elected the Socialist Labor government. The first thing they did was ban US warships from our harbours, nuclear warships. That destroyed the Australia, New Zealand, United States Military Alliance. Stone cold dead, just like that. And most New Zealand conservatives just couldn't understand it, couldn't believe it. And my friend in Moscow told me how it was done. They sat down, 4 delegates, sat down in rooms with the KGB. And they had psychologists there, people who were good at slogans, whatever. They thought, right, we're going to take New Zealand out of ANZUS. Now, we've got to do this subtly because New Zealand is a very pro-American country, so we can't use the anti-American angle. This has got to be New Zealanders standing up for peace. New Zealanders striking an independent foreign policy course. This was going to be a patriotic New Zealand thing. So basically, these guys went back to New Zealand. They held secret meetings with the Labour movement, with the peace movement, and the Labour Party. And within a few short months, legislation was in front of the New Zealand Parliament. It was signed off. Nuclear warships were banned, and that was the end of ANZUS. And I will tell you, if you ever talk to a New Zealander, if you can understand their accent, ask them about the anti-nuclear stand of 1984, which is still there. They'll puff out their chests with pride. They'll say, yeah, we stood up. We are an independent nation. We forged our own foreign policy. We stood up for peace. Not one of them in 100,000 would have any idea that those policies was designed in Moscow by the KGB. Totally duped. 4 million people totally suckered. But could this happen in America? Conceivably. Well, I want to give 3 examples where communists right now are influencing policy debates in your country. 2 big ones and 1 little one. I'll start with the little one. Now, Paul Kengor earlier talked about how Mr. Obama was having a little chat to the Vietnamese Communist Premier recently. Talked about the Thomas Jefferson remarks. I'll add a little bit to that. At the time, Ho Chi Minh, an ardent communist since the 1920s, he had worked with the American OSS during World War II against the Japanese armies. You know, and the OSS, as we know, was heavily penetrated by communists, deliberately recruited from the ranks of the Abraham Lincoln brigades that fought in the Spanish Civil War. So Ho Chi Minh was working with the Americans to expel the Japanese. He succeeded. The next step was to get rid of the French. And Ho Chi Minh wanted American support to do that. He knew that FDR didn't like the French very much. So he deliberately went out of his way. He made big public speeches to rallies in Hanoi, praising, you know, to crowds of people with OSS officers all around him, praising Thomas Jefferson, the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, to sucker the Americans into supporting him against the French. But then FDR died and Harry Truman got in, and Harry Truman wasn't that stupid. Harry Truman understood what Ho Chi Minh was all about and what the communists were all about. So that failed. But the fact that Obama knew that tells me that he knew the real history of it. He knew that that was basically a communist ploy, and he employed that in his talk to Mr. Whatever his name was. But Obama made another statement in that little talk that was never picked up in the mainstream media. He said something to the effect of, and we've agreed that America will help repair the damage of the Vietnam War. Now what that means is that you are going to be bailing out. You're going to be giving taxpayers' money to Vietnam to repair the damage done by Agent Orange, bombings, etc. Your American servicemen are basically, who are suffering from Agent Orange damage and that sort of thing, are left to their own devices. But you're going to be using your taxpayers' money to bail out Vietnam and repair the damage done by your troops in a war that they started. They never mentioned that North Vietnam invaded the sovereign nation of South Vietnam and you guys went to defend your ally. But there's a background to this. There's been a campaign in this country for about 7 or 8 years now, run by a group called the Committees of Correspondence, break off from the Communist Party, and they are allied to Vietnam. That's their buddy. They're always going over there for delegations. They've been enlisting your congressmen and senators, Al Franken, Tom Harkin, Jeff Merkley, Sheila Jackson-Lee, John Conyers, Bob Filner, who's now no longer a congressman. He's a well-known sex pest out in San Diego. They've enlisted all these guys to lobby your Congress to give reparations to Vietnam. They've had Vietnamese, the committees of correspondence, Merle Ratner, etc., have brought delegations from Vietnam to testify before your Congress about the horrors of Agent Orange. They brought little young girls with no legs to, you know, make the congressman cry in tears of sympathy. All a propaganda campaign to scam your taxpayers. I've written a chapter in the book about it called The Vietnam Scam. Now that is being done right now, and at least 7 or 8 of your congressmen and senators are actively involved. Bob Filner went over there to negotiate with the Vietnamese and tell them how he was going to work on your Congress to get this moved forward. And that trip was paid for by the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. And Wally Spaulding up the back there will tell you that is a bona fide Soviet front, now run by the Cubans. So Bob Filner, one of your congressmen, son of a Communist Party member, by the way, very close to Democratic Socialists of America, is going on the dime of an international communist front to negotiate your taxpayers' money going to Vietnam, communist Vietnam. It's one example, and that's happening right now. Another example, a very crucial one, is of course the move to legalise, that's going on right now, the move to legalise illegal immigrants in this country and give them voting rights. Now, the illegal immigrants movement in this country was effectively started in the 40s in California by a man called Bert Corona, bona fide Communist Party member, moved into the Democrat Party, worked for Bobby Kennedy, set up the Viva Kennedy clubs all around California to bring Latinos into the Democrat Party, set up numerous immigrants' rights organisations right throughout California, trained Antonio Villagrosa, the recent mayor of Los Angeles, trained Maria Elena Durazo, who's now head of the California Labour Movement. They have worked together basically to make California a sanctuary state. And they have shifted the demographics of California to turn even Orange County, the most conservative part of America, blue, or at least partially blue. They have taken California out of contention strictly through illegal immigration and giving them voting rights. The next key figure in this movement was a man called Lorenzo Torres out of Arizona. He was head of the Communist Party's Latino Commission, and he worked with groups right throughout the Southwest for many years. He only died last year, to coordinate activities to give amnesty to illegal aliens, to fight any laws like SB 70 in Arizona that would clamp down on illegal immigration, and basically promote sanctuary states and to get more Latinos voting Democrat. So he was the most successful politician in Arizona's history, in my opinion, and most Arizonans have never heard of him. The next major figure and player in this thing is a man called Eliseo Medina. Now he's an executive vice president of SEIU, also a member of Democratic Socialists of America and actively supporting the Communist Party. Now he is the man who's done more than, he works now with Luis Gutierrez out of Illinois, with Raul Grijalva out of Arizona, Communist Party supporter, both of them are, and others to promote illegal immigration, to legalise illegal immigrants. And I'll say why in a minute. But to give proof of how this works, see, the key to all this is the labour movement. If you control the labour movement, you control the Democrat Party. So small groups of communists set policies. Because they control the labour unions, they make it labour union policy, and the labour unions make it Democrat policy. Now, you had a situation in this country unique in the West, that you had anti-communists in control of the labour movement up until 1995. You had George Meany, Lane Kirkland, etc. But in 1995, there was a coup engineered by Democratic Socialists of America. They put John Sweeney, their member, in as president of the AFL-CIO. They removed the anti-communist clause from the organisation's constitution, and the Marxists came flooding back. They now control every major labour union in your country, AFL-CIO, ASCME, SEIU, NEA, you name it, they run it. So that gives approximately 10 to 20,000 communists. By controlling the labour movement, they can dictate Democratic Party policy. They do it every day. You want to know what the Democrats are going to do tomorrow? Read the People's World today. Because what's in the People's World today will become union policy tomorrow and Democratic Party policy the next. So now, before 1995, what was the most virulently anti-illegal immigrant organisation in this country? AFL-CIO. They lobbied Congress all the time to enact legislation to censure and punish employers who employed illegal immigrants. They were totally on their case because they understood that illegal immigrants were competition for their members, unfair competition. They drove down wages and conditions. But now who is the biggest cheerleader for giving voting rights to illegal immigrants? The AFL-CIO and the SEIU. And who is the man who changed that policy? It was Eliseo Medina. He got the AFL-CIO to go 100% reversal in policy from anti-illegal immigrant to pro-illegal immigrant. And why did they want to do that? I'll tell you why. Eliseo Medina was at the America's Futures Now conference in 2011, got up before all the assembled comrades and talked about illegal immigration and how we had to get these guys voting. We had to give them citizenship and voting rights. And he talked about it, it was nothing to do with compassion, it was nothing to do with reuniting families or improving the economy or all the reasons we were given. It all came down to numbers. He was very, very blatant about it. He said, right, there are 12 million of these people. Well, there will be 12 million voters. If we can get 12 million of these guys voting, in 2008, they went by about 70% for Mr. Obama. Now, if we can give these guys voting rights, that's going to give the Democrats 8 million more voters. 8 million. That will take Texas out of contention. Texas will go blue. Arizona will go blue. New Mexico will go blue. The whole of the Southwest and various other states all over the country will be Democrat strongholds, just as California is now. It will be mathematically impossible for the Republicans to ever win another election. You take Texas and all their electoral votes, that's it. This will be a one-party state, controlled by the Democrats, who are controlled by the Communists and Democratic Socialists of America. This is socialisation through immigration. And you've got these dumb Republicans who are now in recess, who are being lobbied relentlessly. We'll go and read the People's World today. They're talking about how they are lobbying all these congressmen in targeted districts all around this country to come out with an immigration bill when they return to the House. They know the stakes. They're not on holiday. They are lobbying. There's big rallies in Bakersfield yesterday. They are on their case because they know this is their way of controlling this country. Medina said quite bluntly, he said, this will give us a governing majority for the future, and not just for the next few election cycles, forever. Because they know that if they get power again, there ain't ever going to be any opposition. Because if you think the IRS is bad now, and you think all the, OSH and all these other organisations have been harassing conservatives now, you wait to see what happens if they get in again and they've got 8 million Latino voters backing them up. The Republican Party will be done. And you've got these silly Republicans who seriously think that they're going to get these illegal immigrants voting for them. Maybe in 20 years... Look, Jews have been voting 80% Democrat for over 100 years. Blacks have been voting 90% Democrat for 50 years. Maybe the Latinos, who are socially conservative, will eventually vote Republican if they are ever given the chance. But that's 20, 30 years down the track, all they need is 2 more election cycles, and this country is a one-party state. And once that's done, there ain't no coming back. That's how a small group of Marxists are going to take your country out of your grip forever, if they're allowed to do so. A few months ago, the Australian Minister of Defence, and if you don't know where Australia is, it's a little island off our coast, right? Okay, just off our west coast. But the Australian Minister of Defence was up in China for talks, and a top Chinese official publicly embarrassed him. He said, now is the time for Australians to choose. Do you stay under American protection or do you come under Chinese protection? If you are smart, you'll choose China because we are the growing power in the region. Now, he wouldn't have been cocky enough to say that under Bush, certainly not under Reagan, probably not even under Clinton. But he's cocky enough to say it now because of the leadership that's in your White House. And all around this planet, your allies are freaking out. From Israel to Germany to Canada to South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Australia, they're all freaking out because they see that your president seems to love the bad guys more than he loves them. And you saw where American prestige is going right now when your president called for help to go into Syria. They're all lining up to support him, right? Couldn't wait to get on board. I'm not saying you should go into Syria, far from it. It'd be madness. But it just shows where American prestige has gone. Vladimir Putin, who spent most of his life in the KGB trying to bring you down, is now regarded as more of a statesman on the world stage than your president. Your allies have seen what your president did to Poland and Czechoslovakia. Got straight into power, took away their missile shield, left them open to the Russians. They spent all those years getting away from the Russians, and your president put them straight back under their control. They've seen what he did to Georgia, betrayed them to the Russians. They've seen what he's doing now to Israel. Israel has no friends left in the Middle East now because of the meddling of your president. And they may be forced to take desperate measures to defend themselves, and those measures could put us into World War III. Japan, which was never supposed to rearm after World War II, is now rearming. And that does not please us in Australia and New Zealand, I can tell you. But I can't blame them, because they can't trust your president to protect them from North Korea and China. So you have a president that cries peace all the time, has a Nobel Peace Prize in his trophy cabinet, and is leading us into war. And it's a war that the good guys may not win. So that's serious, folks. So every Westerner, everybody who loves liberty, has a very powerful vested interest in America staying strong and prosperous and militarily powerful. Because how America goes, we all go. You go down, we go down. You go up, we can go up. It's very, very important. Now, my new book is called, pretty provocative title, it's The Enemies Within, Communists, Socialists and Progressives in the US Congress. Now, the book is really about the 2 big secrets of modern communism. And there are 2 of them. The first is this, and I think they borrowed it off the devil. Because we all understand that the cleverest thing the devil ever did was to convince people he doesn't exist. What have the communists done in the last 20 years, folks? They don't exist, right? And if they do, they're no longer a threat. Why worry? But it ain't true. The other big threat of the other big secret of modern communism is the ability of a tiny Marxist-Leninist party to get their policies implemented as the law of the land in their country. So what I mean by that, less than 20,000 Marxists in your country are able to dictate the legislative process, the laws that rule you for over 300 million people. That's a very small tail wagging a very big dog. Now, a lot of people scoff at that. They say that's a bit exaggerated. Because, you know, like when these communists stand for public office, which they still do occasionally, they'll get sort of 79 votes or 129 votes or something. And people laugh at them. Why would we worry about these people? But is it just the number of votes you get that determine your level of political influence? How many votes did Al Capone ever get in Chicago? Telling me he didn't run that town? How many votes does the mafia get in Sicily these days? Telling me they don't run Sicily? Bribery, extortion, corruption, backroom deals, propaganda, intimidation, threats, vote fraud. There's a whole bunch of ways that small groups of organised people can manipulate much larger groups from behind the scenes. And that's what the communists do, folks. That's what they've always done. They've never been majorities or big parties. Less than 2,000 Bolsheviks took over Russia in 1917, a country at the time of 140 million people. Less than 2,000 of them. But they have the science of Leninism on their side. Marxism might be a failure, but Leninism has been hugely successful. Because Leninism is the science of taking power and holding power. Very, very successful. The way that it's done in this country and most Western countries is through the labour movement. And you were very lucky in America for a long time, and you're lucky in this state because you're right to work. But you're very lucky for a long time because your AFL-CIO was led by hardcore anti-communists like Lane Kirkland and George Meany. Whatever their faults were, they kept the Reds out of the unions. But things changed in 1995 because that was the year that your largest Marxist group, Democratic Socialists of America, communist group despite its name, that was the year that they took over the AFL-CIO. They kicked out Lane Kirkland and they put their member, John Sweeney, in as president. And now their protege, Richard Trumka, is doing the job for them. First thing Sweeney did when he took over was to abolish the anti-communist clause from the AFL-CIO's constitution. And the Marxists came flooding back. They now control AFSCME, SEIU, AFT, NEA, anything with an alphabet after it, they run it. The AFL-CIO itself is theirs, lock, stock and barrel. So what does that give them? It's only about 10 or 11% of the US workforce. But think about this, people. How many Democrats in this country at any level, elected officials, get elected without labour union support? Hardly any, if any. They need the unions for manpower, for money, for get out the vote, putting up yard signs, vote fraud, you name it. It's all the unions. Now if they give you your job, and you know that, when they come to you with demands, what do? These guys totally depend on the unions. If the unions want them to elect a certain person or to promote certain legislation, that's what they do. That is how the very small dog, the very small tail of the US Marxists, by controlling the unions, wag the Democratic Party. And if they control the Democratic Party, when they're in power, they control you. That's how they do it.